This is your reality check.
Welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. Today is April 4th, 2020, and it's just me, producer Pat. As with the last handful of weeks, we are bringing you segments by the panel individually, given the current situation, until we can go back to our regular format. We have two interesting segments for you today. Adam looks into whether Tom Nook from the game Animal Crossing is a greedy capitalist. But before that, Darren talks to us about the risks of death from COVID-19. I hope you enjoy both segments and that you're staying healthy, and we will talk to you soon.
Hi listeners, how are you? Before I do my segment, I thought I'd do a brief check-in and see how you're managing. Obviously, I can't hear your responses, and that's usually why I don't ask how you are. But these are odd times, and for many, hard times. We're not just fighting this virus, but all the consequences of it. While these are primarily economic and social, there's a whole range of disruptions to our lives. Self-care and compassion are valuable, and acknowledging the huge psychological cost of COVID-19 is important. Now, I can't pick up your groceries for you or walk your dog, but I can try to provide you with some information in an uncertain environment. I think what many people want to know is the answer to this question. What are my chances of dying from COVID-19? Or perhaps this question. If I am infected with COVID-19, what are my chances of dying? It is critical that you realize that they are not the same question. I'll be exploring both of them during my time with you today. But, spoiler alert, there is no reliable answer to either question, and even if we narrow it down to your age and location and other factors, we still don't know. But let's explore what we do know at this time, recorded on the evening of April 2nd. Now, as I started to look into how likely it is to die from COVID-19, I came across an excellent piece from the website Our World in Data titled, What Do We Know About the Risk of Dying from COVID-19? This is by Hannah Ritchie and Max Roser, and it was published on March 25th. You can find a link in the show notes at trcpodcast.com. It's exactly what I was looking for, so you're going to get an abridged version. One of the main reasons for my segment is that different terms are being used by different groups and perhaps even inconsistent ways by the same groups, or people are just not clear enough. And I've probably committed this error on Facebook myself. I'll tell you the three key terms up front and then expand on each of them afterwards. 1. Case fatality rate. 2. Crude mortality rate. And 3. Infection fatality rate. So first, the case fatality rate, or case fatality risk, or case fatality ratio. CFR, case fatality rate. Now I'll probably use both the full phrase and the initialisms to make it easier and consistent. As the word case in the phrase indicates, this is the likelihood you will die if you have a case of COVID-19. This is often what the media report. The math here is straightforward. You take the number who have died from COVID-19 and divide it by the number of people diagnosed with COVID-19. For example, if 100 people have died from COVID-19 and 1,000 are diagnosed, that's a CFR case fatality rate of 10%. Our World in Data urges caution. Quote, but it is important to note that it is the ratio between the number of confirmed deaths from the disease and the number of confirmed cases, not total cases. That means that it is not the same as, and in a fast-moving situations like COVID-19, probably not even close to, the true risk for an infected person. That was term number 1. And we don't want to confuse it with term number 2, crude mortality rate, or crude fatality rate, CMR. The crude part is a correct term here because it only gives you the probability that any person in a population will die from the disease. To highlight that, that means any person, not just if that person is infected or known to be infected. For the crude mortality rate, you divide deaths by total population. This metric doesn't care about who's infected and who isn't, it's just who has died from COVID-19. Using similar numbers to the ones I used above, let's say 100 people have died from COVID-19 and the population is 1,000, that would give a crude mortality rate of 10%. But that number changes if you have a larger population. If 100 people died from COVID-19, same as before, but the population was 10,000, now the CMR is 1%. You wouldn't know if 100 people were infected or 5,000. While this might be useful to some people, I don't think this is useful for anyone reading the news, and it just confuses a lot of things. Thankfully, I haven't seen this number that much. Now, Our World in Data uses the 1918 pandemic to illustrate how people can confuse the CFR and the CMR. Quote, one estimate by Johnson and Mueller in 2002 is that the pandemic killed 50 million people. That would have been 2.7% of the world population at the time. This means the crude mortality rate of 2.7. But 2.7% is often misreported as the case fatality rate, which is wrong because not everyone in the world was infected with Spanish flu. If the crude mortality rate really was 2.7, then the case fatality rate was much higher. It would be the percentage of people who died after being diagnosed with the disease. End quote. So, most people don't actually want to know the answer to the question, how likely am I to die from COVID-19, as they understand the key variables whether you are infected or not. Consequently, I think most people want to know the infection fatality rate, the IFR, number 3. Now, the infection fatality rate is the number of deaths from a disease divided by the total number of cases. If you have 100 deaths and 1,000 cases, then the IFR is 10%. But wasn't this similar to the CFR? No, because this metric uses the total number of actual cases and the actual number of deaths. The total number of cases of COVID-19 is not known because not everyone who has COVID-19 is tested. Think of all the asymptomatic carriers that are supposedly out there. If we somehow lived in a world where everyone who was infected with COVID-19 was known to be infected with COVID-19, then the case fatality rate and the infection fatality rate should be the same, ignoring the issue for how no test for COVID-19 is perfect. Our World in Data says, quote, "We may be able to estimate the total number of cases and use it to calculate the IFR, and researchers do this. But the total number of cases is not known, so the IFR cannot be accurately calculated. And despite what some media reports imply, the CFR is not the same as, or probably even similar to, the IFR." And then Our World in Data explores why, and I think that exploration is worth sharing. If you think for a moment about different healthcare systems across or within countries and how many people may be diagnosed with a case of COVID-19 at a particular time, it's clear that the case fatality rate isn't a constant number. It changes with the context. It is not a fact about the disease, but how our healthcare systems have interacted with some aspects of the disease. Quoting Our World in Data, "The probability that someone dies from a disease doesn't just depend on the disease itself, but also on the treatment they receive and the patient's own ability to recover from it. This means that the CFR can decrease or increase over time as responses change, and that it can vary by location and by the characteristics of the infected population, such as age or sex. For instance, older populations would expect to see a higher CFR from COVID-19 than younger ones." End quote. For example, during the early stages of COVID-19 in China, there were CFRs of over 20% in Wuhan. And I purposely use the plural to underscore that there isn't just one CFR. That was in early January 2020, but by the end of February, it was a few percent. Not just 20%, but now just down to a few percent, because people were getting better treatment. Our World in Data shows a graph comparing 4 different areas of China, to which they say, quote, "You can also see that the CFR was different in different places. By the 1st of February, the CFR in Wuhan was still 5.8%, while it was 0.7% across the rest of China. This shows that what we said about the CFR generally, that it changes from time to time and place to place, is true for the CFR of COVID-19 specifically. When we talk about the CFR of a disease, the case fatality rate, we need to talk about it in a specific time and place. The CFR in Wuhan on 23rd of February or in Italy on 4th of March, rather than as a single unchanging value, the outbreak from the beginning of January to the 20th of September 2020. As I said previously, the CFR does not indicate the risk of dying, and this is for 2 main reasons that go in opposite directions. If you have many people infected with COVID-19, but are not diagnosed as having COVID-19, the CFR will overestimate the true risk of dying from COVID-19. We don't know the total, but I think it is highly likely that there are many undiagnosed cases. Again, uncertain though. Additionally, the case fatality rate is affected by the number of tests conducted, which is different almost everywhere, so comparing CFRs across countries is problematic to say the least. So that was one reason. What's the other one? The other one is that there are people who will die from COVID-19, but have not yet died. The case fatality rate will underestimate the true risk of death in this case, and unfortunately there are many in this situation. Quoting Our World in Data, with the COVID-19 outbreak, it can take between 2 to 8 weeks for people to go from first symptoms to death, according to data from early cases. This is not a problem once an outbreak has finished. Afterwards, the total number of deaths will be known, and we can use it to calculate the CFR. But during an outbreak, we need to be careful with how to interpret the CFR because the outcome, recovery or death, of a large number of cases is still unknown. This is a common source for misinterpretation of a rising CFR in the earlier stages of an outbreak. This is what happened during the SARS-CoV outbreak in 2003. The CFR was initially reported to be 3 to 5% during the early stages of the outbreak, but it had risen to around 10% by the end of it. End quote. This confused things in the response that people had because people thought it was getting more deadly over time, and it wasn't. Now, I think what we want is the infection fatality rate, and we definitely don't have that. Well, what about the case fatality rate? That was to see if you're paying attention. There's no single case fatality rate. Now, currently, the case fatality rates have a range from 0.2% in Germany to 7.7% in Italy. Iceland has also some very low numbers. But those will change, and neither of these is representative of the true likelihood of death from COVID-19, itself possibly an incoherent concept. To use an absurd example to illustrate the point, Our World in Data points out that on February 24th, Iran supposedly had 2 confirmed cases and 2 deaths from COVID-19. So they had a case fatality rate of 100%, right? 2 for 2. But now their rate is much lower at around 7%. Now, South Korea, which has done more testing than pretty much any country, has a case fatality rate of 1.7%. Does that mean that this is the true value that other countries will eventually converge towards? No, silly, that's not how it works, as it's specific to a time and a location at that time. It's tempting to think that there would be convergence as testing increases, and there may be some, but that would only work if everything else was the same. Age of population, healthcare, culture, etc. Also, it assumes cases and deaths are tracked the same way, and they are not. Just within Canada, there are different definitions of when someone has recovered from COVID-19. One of our provinces recently changed how they verified cases, removing a secondary check. So the case numbers suddenly went up because this backlog was reduced because they were no longer doing the secondary step. And apparently, Australia has changed their definition of things numerous times. Also, how are deaths being classified? One might think that this is relatively straightforward, but it's not. There's sometimes suspected of death from COVID-19 versus clearly from COVID-19. There's also the issue of secondary issues that cause death, not COVID-19 itself. What about the false negatives and false positive rates for different tests? Can people become reinfected? All of this is shifting and uncertain, and we don't have enough information at this time. To summarize, what you want to know, the infection fatality rate, is not available for me to tell you. And there wouldn't only be one infection fatality rate, there'd be different rates for different places because of the diversity of healthcare and age and so on. The consolation prize, the case fatality rate, is shifting and different in most countries. And to be fair, there may be a global rate overall for each of the infection fatality rate and the case fatality rate, but that's not what most people want to know because it doesn't relate to their personal risk, although they may be intellectually curious about it. And this can't be fully specified at this time, only roughly approximated. So why did I tell you this? Well, so you can understand the complexity and nuance of COVID-19 tracking and apply critical thinking when you see those numbers being reported all over the place. When you hear people talk about the fatality rate, you can clarify which one they mean. Does it even apply to where you live? Is it even relevant? Now, by now you should know you're at much greater risk if you are elderly or immunocompromised. That's still true. If you're in your 20s or 30s, the likelihood of you dying from COVID-19 seems very low, less than 1%. But you should still stay home and only leave for essential reasons, as you may infect others, or perhaps could even cause some harm to yourself down the road, as we don't understand the nature of this condition and disease. So there's an overall general point that there is not a one true rate. It just doesn't work that way because it interacts mostly with the healthcare system. Even when people are comparing flu to COVID-19, and now it seems pretty clear that COVID-19 is worse, again, we'll wait for more data, the flu is interacting with how people are treated for the flu. You could imagine some other world where there's no healthcare at all. What does that mean? No one even rests. There's no palliative anything. And then there's this normal course of disease and people live and people die. You see how problematic it gets to even think about what that might mean. But I wanted to end on some quick tips for masks. Different topic. We're not doing a full segment on masks. Maybe we'll someday. I just wanted to mention this quickly because by the time you hear this, the recommendations may change to suggest people start wearing masks in countries where they don't already. So regardless though, if you're already wearing a mask or going to, please wear it properly. Don't touch it repeatedly. Don't have facial hair at the border. When you remove it, treat it as a hazardous waste product and wash your hands thoroughly. Otherwise, any utility will be greatly reduced. So stay strong, everyone. Keep hope alive. And until next time, think better to act better.
What's up, cuboids? A new video game for the Nintendo Switch, Animal Crossing New Horizons, was released a couple of weeks ago. Since much of the world is confined at home, this means that a lot of people are playing Animal Crossing, and the rest of them are probably tired of hearing about it. You can maybe guess which camp I'm in. Now, a staple of these games is a character called Tom Nook. He's called a raccoon in international versions, such as the version I have here in Canada, but in Japan, he's referred to as a tanuki. A tanuki is a Japanese raccoon dog. Gamers may find the term familiar as Mario gets a tanuki suit in Super Mario Bros. 3. This lets him turn into stone. Japanese folklore often depicts a tanuki as a mischievous trickster who can shapeshift and can often turn to stone. Now, they aren't actually closely related to raccoons. They just have this superficial similarity, which is the reason why a lot of North American players might think Tom Nook looks a lot like a raccoon. Basically, in a world populated by anthropomorphic animals, Tom Nook is an anthropomorphic tanuki. The new game involves your character, the villager, arriving on a deserted island and building up not only their own home, but the island as well. The formula has changed over the years, and there have been many games, but ultimately, there's a sort of recurring theme here. The character arrives in a new town, meets Tom Nook, who sets them up with a home, and then gets them to work off the debt. Sounds kind of seedy, right? In fact, a lot of people paint Tom Nook as a shameless, evil capitalist taking advantage of the villager. The player never really has a choice in the matter. Tom Nook presents it as a favor, but forces the house on them. When the cost of the house is paid off, the character is immediately forced into an upgrade and put back into debt. The cycle continues as the player is constantly buried under an increasing debt. And indeed, this amount seems to be massive. The in-game currency is bells. In the original game, released on the Nintendo 64 in Japan and released on the Nintendo GameCube here in North America, the original mortgage amount for your house was 19,800 bells. Once your house has a basement, second floor, and a number of size upgrades, you're looking at 1.5 million bells before getting rid of your debt. The new game's original house costs nearly 100,000 bells, with the total finished cost nearing 6 million. Sounds like a lot of money. So Tom Nook is evil, right? He's taking advantage of you, he's an evil capitalist. The game is essentially debt slavery, and it teaches children about the evils of banks, landlords, and the horrible, endless debt of homeownership, right? While playing the games, of which I've played all of them extensively since the Nintendo GameCube, I always laughed when Tom Nook tricks the players into another debt. When I'd see memes or funny pieces online about how evil he was, I laughed. I thought that was funny. In an example of this from the parody gaming news website Hard Drive, the headline reads, and I quote, "Opinion. When I say eat the rich, that includes Tom Nook." I was delighted last month when I saw a different take. The first I saw of this was on Twitter, where user at Mr. Pibmo said, and I quote, "I'm seeing Tom Nook as a greedy capitalist propaganda again, so can I remind you, aside from his zero interest, zero deadline loans, his price for your initial house is 39,800 bells, and bells are equivalent to yen. He asks you for around $400 for a house." Indeed, a lot of this is true and puts the whole idea on its head. Importantly, Tom Nook does indeed provide a no-interest loan. So you get saddled with 19,800 or even 98,000 bells of debt, as you do in the first and most recent games respectively, and you'll owe him as much in a decade as you would on the very first day. You can test this too by rolling the clock of your game system forward, though in most games it will lead to some upset animal villagers and a lot of weeds around your town. There isn't a bank I'm aware of that will give you a zero-interest loan with no time limit to pay it back. Zero-interest loans do exist, though, and that gives us a bit of an idea of what could be going on here. The brick is famous for its no money down and don't pay a cent until whatever year deals. Car dealerships can have low or no interest loans, but they are motivated to do so because they are not in the business of accruing interest. They are in the business of selling furniture or cars. Similarly, Tom Nook isn't a moneylender. He's a seller. He gives you a no-interest loan for the house which he and his staff build for you. He is not only a seller, but also a builder. Presumably the house is being sold at a profit. So, what about those prices? How expensive is this house really? As the Twitter post mentioned, Animal Crossing, like most games made in Japan, have a currency which is closely tied to the Japanese yen than any other cost. Looking at the value of the yen can give us some insight into video game currency. The yen isn't close to a US or Canadian dollar, it's actually much closer to a US or Canadian penny. 100 yen today is worth about 93 cents American, or $1.31 Canadian. Have you ever wondered why, in a lot of Japanese role-playing games, you can't buy much for 1 or 2 coins? In Final Fantasy, a cheap item, a heal potion, costs 60 gil. It's the in-game currency. In Pokemon, a basic Pokeball costs 200 Pokemon dollars or Poké dollars. A bottle of water is 200 Poké dollars. Why isn't that 2 Poké dollars? Similarly, in Animal Crossing, a piece of fruit, which is plentiful on your island, sells for 100 bells, and an exotic piece of fruit sells for 500 bells. Certainly, an apple which can be picked off of a tree, selling for something closer to $1, makes more sense than $100. Understanding this makes the costs and amounts from these games make more sense in context. It's why a player won't often collect 1 or 2 coins for killing even the most basic monsters in most games, though there are, of course, some exceptions, such as the Earthbound or Mother games where currency is closer to the US dollar, or the Dragon Quest game where gold coins aren't really comparable to either a yen or a dollar. The Legend of Zelda games also have a very valuable currency, with the first game topping out at 255 rupees, and of course in Super Mario Bros. A mere 100 coins can be traded for Resurrection, which is quite a good deal. There's also something about the pricing. A Nintendo Switch in Animal Crossing costs 29,980 bells. Seems like an odd number, but this is identical to the price of the system at launch in Japan. While we here are used to everything ending in $99.99, much like the Nintendo Switch, which launched for $299.99 in the United States, prices like 29,980 are common in Japan, hence your 98,000 bell home cost instead of, say, a 99,999 and 99 cents cost for a home. So much to say, your Animal Crossing house is actually quite cheap. $19,800 for your first house in the first game is about $183 US. What a great deal. 98,000 bells, the cost in the new game, is a bit over $900 US. Also a pretty good price. That doesn't seem too bad when you can buy that from the money you'd get by selling just 196 pieces of fruit. This might not seem like you're getting much, as your first house is basically one big empty room with no visible plumbing or electricity. A one-room house may not seem like much, but to Japanese standards, it's fairly large in a country where rooms are counted in mat sizes, and of course, there are many upgrades that you can get. Though no utilities are shown, you are able to turn on and off a light somehow. When an electronic device like an Apple TV, that's a TV shaped like an actual apple, not like the ones that are sold by the Apple company, a light or a game system will automatically be powered on. Perhaps the Animal Crossing village, where there are no taxes and the mayor's position comes with no salary, is actually an objectivist utopia like Galt's Gulch, and the objects are all powered by John Galt's wireless power source, which collects energy from the static electricity in the air. Even when fully upgraded, you get a home which includes 5 large rooms and a basement. That home will only cost you 5,795,800 bells, which is less than 54,000 US dollars. I'd buy that for $1 or a bell. Now this can be paid off by selling fruit, bugs, fish, and even seashells on an island where they are plentiful, and the lack of scarcity seems to do nothing to negatively affect these prices. Now, to the average North American player, they can do a bunch of math to estimate this worth, but it should be considered that to a Japanese gamer, the numbers are based on a currency which is much more intuitive to them, so the cost of all the items, including that of their house, is relatable and it's rooted in something real. So, does this mean Tom Nook's a good guy, and that we're all wrong to be judging him so harshly? Well, it's a video game. Of course, you can't have the player buy a house which would cost the equivalent of millions and millions of dollars in any decent-sized Japanese city. For the same reason that most adventurers in video games don't spend their time constantly grinding to get money to pay off the costs for food and rent, dedicating only a very small portion to luxury goods, we have to make the numbers balance out in the interest of fun for the players. If a player needed to constantly play for 40 hours a week for an entire month just to pay off the equivalent of a month's mortgage payment, taxes, utilities, and food, and then barely have enough bells left to buy one piece of furniture and maybe a shirt and pants, then no one would really want to play Animal Crossing. It wouldn't be fun. This game is a sort of life simulation game, but it can't just be as realistic as actual life. It needs to be an abstracted, simplified version, easier to consume in small chunks of time, and more appealing, more fun to play. Tom Nook's house may be affordable if we do the math, but the point isn't what it would cost in real life. The point is what it would seem to cost to the player. In game time and game effort, the player needs to give a lot into paying off those debts, which makes it seem expensive, and that impression is what makes Tom Nook seem like a capitalist villain who's trying to take advantage of the villager, and that's exactly what he's doing. And if after all this, Tom Nook doesn't end up being wealthy and happy himself, then he's just a cog in the capitalist machine, just like many landlords and small business owners in the real world. Animal Crossing is a video game. Tom Nook is not a landlord. He is not a banker. He is just a sort of greedy capitalist, even though he sells you a cheap house with an interest-free loan and pays you top dollar for moths, apples, and seashells. Just like vilifying him beyond what the game intended is fun, but not really the point, so is painting his actions as overly altruistic beyond what was intended. It's a game. Have fun with it, and never let anyone tell you to stop overanalyzing things. Peace out, Cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at @TRC_podcast.